Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 110.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on true custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques, bringing you the custom club fitting experience of your life and lower scores always. About a month ago on our AGCP club fitting forum, a friend, Manny Guzman, mentioned a book titled The Perfect Bend, written by Jeff Sheets, who is someone who you may remember I've done a few podcast interviews with in the past. The Perfect Bend is a book about the basics of making golf club hosel adjustments, which is something very important to optimizing the performance of golf clubs. Well, I purchased the book and read it, and I'm excited to bring Jeff back to do another podcast with me to talk about some of the basics he discussed in this book that can be important to golfers and true custom club fitters. So enjoy this great interview with Jeff Sheets from Jeff Sheets Golf Design, discussing the perfect bend. Well, hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 110. How about that, of the Golf Improvement Podcast? And welcome back to Jeff Sheets from Jeff Sheets Golf. Jeff did two really great interviews with me in the past on golf club head design, but the topic today is one that I think is really interesting because it's something that has, as we talked before we started, a lot of staying power. Jeff wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Perfect Bend, and one of my friends told me about it a while ago, and there's some terrific information in there, not only for fitters, but I think for golfers to understand about what happens when you bend golf clubs, when can they not be bent, a lot of things like that. So Jeff, I asked you to do this. You said, you jumped right in, said, yep, and so we'll get on with it. It's good to talk with you again.
Good to talk to you too, Tony. I've enjoyed the last two times that we chatted, and this book here, The Perfect Bend, as I was telling you earlier before we got this going, I wrote two books 10 years ago, The Perfect Bend and The Perfect Fit. Both of them really about golf technology and then what to do with the equipment. One of them is really out of date, The Perfect Fit. While The Perfect Bend, here we are 10 years later, I really don't think there's anything in here that's obsolete.
I think it's just as topical. Yeah, just as topical as it was when you wrote it. So, but, we're going to, before we really dive into that, rather than talk about your story, which we've done in the past, maybe fill our listeners in a little bit. What have you been up to?
In 2009, I left the corporate world and ventured out on my own. And so I've been an independent golf club designer for the past decade. It's pretty interesting. I think about it last night. I'm now employed the longest with any company that I've been with, and it happens to be myself. So it's a little bit of a milestone.
Yeah, right.
And something you usually don't think about doing when you're approaching 50. But, quite often when you're approaching that age and you're deep into your career, people don't want you. They want young blood. And I found by collaborating with other industry veterans, there's a lot you can do as opposed to trying to go back to that corporate world. So I'm very busy and got a lot of balls in the air with various golf club development projects. It's fun.
Yeah, that's.
I don't look towards retiring like I did when I worked in corporate America.
Yeah, I feel a lot the same way. It's a lot of fun to get to do what I get to do too. Well, I finished reading your book, I guess 2 or 3 weeks ago, and The Perfect Bend. I have the other one too, but what really led you to write it? Maybe I could assume that what led you to it, but I'd rather hear the story of it. So go ahead.
Well, again, this is the difference between corporate America and working on for yourself. Back in 2008, when I wrote the book, I was vice president of R&D at Golfsmith, and while I had been there, I had written The Perfect Fit, which was really the basis for the fitting schools that we held at the company, and so there was a purpose to write that book. In fact, if I'd been asked if I wanted to write the book at the time, I would have told you no. It was something I just had to do, being the individual in the position that I was at that company. And I was down in Mexico in August of that year. I had already written The Perfect Fit, and I said, I want to write a book that I want to write, not one that I have to write. And I began with one chapter of the book. The book was actually going to be called The Golf Club Aficionado, and it was going to be a very thick, high gloss page coffee table book, really pertaining to elements about golf equipment that the general consumer isn't aware of and could be very interesting. And The Perfect Bend actually was the first chapter that I wrote. And it wasn't going to be the first chapter of the book. It was actually going to be deeper into the book, but I thought for the fun of it, let me start on this chapter here. And I happened to write the entire book while I was on my vacation in Mexico that week. And it was shortly after that I found myself going into business for myself. And suddenly, that free time that you have when you work for someone had all gone away. And subsequently, the Golf Club Aficionado never got completed.
How about that? Well, one of the things I really like about the book, some books, they're great and you have to take a long time to read it. I think many, many people can read it in a few hours, okay? But, and to some level, I think that's a great benefit, okay, Jeff, because there's a lot of information in it, but it's just very, it's very concise, it's to the point. But there, some of the things we're going to talk about are really time-tested things that people need to know. And so I think that was, I'm glad you ended up not writing The Golf Aficionado, I guess. Maybe. Well, almost every week we talk on our AGCP forums, someone asks the question, can I bend this? And it's not because we're not smart. It's just because we rely on each other to help each other out, and not everybody touches every club. But so I think it's worth and sometimes you get surprised by what you can bend and can't bend. Can you talk a little bit and go a little bit back to basics, about some of the normal iron materials that are used in iron heads and maybe some pluses and minuses of different materials? And that, that probably could be an hour conversation, but we won't do that, but I'm sure you've thought a little bit about this. So,
yeah, if we take a look at mainstream equipment and what the materials that are used, and we'll categorize with irons right now. We won't get into metal woods or hybrids or putters, but as we look at irons, you have really two categories of construction: investment casting and forging, and the materials that you use in both of those types of construction are going to differ greatly. When it comes to irons, the most commonly used casting material is a 431 stainless steel. When I first got into club making back in the 1980s, 17.4 stainless steel was the most common material. And you will still find some 17.4 irons around, but fortunately, most of the manufacturers have recognized that 431 is more than ample as far as strength goes. And if you're going to be adjusting the casting, quite likely it'll be a 431 material. The benefits of 431, first of all, it doesn't require a heat treatment like 17.4 does to enable it to bend.
Yeah.
And so if you try to ever bend a 17.4 iron that hasn't been heat treated, it's going to completely resist any type of thrust that you put into the hosel. If you do find a heat treated 17.4 iron head, you're only going to be able to get about 2 degrees of bend out of it. And just because you've accomplished a 2-degree bend doesn't mean it's going to remain there. My first year working out on the PGA Tour in the equipment trailers, I made a very rookie mistake being a rookie out there. A player would come in with his pings or something. I'd go ahead and make the adjustments to their lofts and lies. They'd get up in the range, hit some balls, they'd come back and say, I don't think you changed this. And I'd come back and look at it and it's like, well, here are my notes. Yes, I adjusted this one 1.5 degrees, but it's back where we started. And I realized that I would have to shock the hosel with impact of a hammer while it was still in the bending machine and determine if it's going to jump back. I want it to jump back right then and there.
I mean, that's really interesting to contemplate that you would have to do that, right? I mean, a lot of people don't understand.
Well, you don't want to be, the best players in the world keep coming back to your tour van for a second or third trip going, hey, did you bend this? And you don't want that to happen. Yeah. And so the beauty with 431 is it has no muscle memory or no steel memory from the casting position like the 17.4 does. And so if you go to bend a 431 head 1, 2, 3 degrees, it's going to remain there. Also, 431, quite often we go through like an annealing process, which actually softens the metal, unlike the 431 where the heat treatment just helps align the grain structure after it had been previously cast through the heat treatment, allowing you to bend. The annealing process that 431 goes through actually makes it a more malleable material. And I've been able to bend 431 irons regularly 4 degrees. If you get into a 431-1 or some iteration that goes through a multiple annealing process, you can get anywhere from a 6 to 10 degree bend to the material, but you probably won't find that available from most manufacturers. When I worked for Golfsmith, quite often I would do the special annealing processes because I know the club makers, that there was always club makers that needed more than the conventional 2 or 4 degrees that they want bent, and I try to make sure that there's product in the line that can be bent upwards of 8 to 10 degrees.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the old myths too. Is you can't bend cast clubs, and there's some yays and nays about that. I mean, sometimes yes, but many times no. So I mean, so
yeah, and sometimes you have a product that is not being passed along as it should be. So if a company says yes, we have a 431-1 stainless steel, and you should be able to bend it at least 6 degrees. And the manufacturer just gave you a 431, not to the client's knowledge. You're going to have people complaining that it doesn't do what it's meant to do. And that's not an uncommon problem running across the material from your supplier that you did not spec out.
Yeah.
Then if you got to continue on with cast materials, again, 431 is the most common. You'll still run across some 17.4. The other 2 materials that you'll find in castings are a 304 stainless steel and an 8620 carbon steel. And both of those are very soft metals, and they are very easy to adjust because they have a great ductility to them, good elongation properties. The 304 and 8620 steels on a Rockwell scale are just as soft as the carbon steel that's used in forgings. You're talking about on a Rockwell scale about an HRB 85, right in that area.
So give us the layman's discussion of what the Rockwell. It's a measure of hardness, isn't it?
Correct. It's a hardness measurement method, and it's very much like a swing weight scale. You go from your B, you have HR 85B for 304 stainless, 8620 carbon steel, and the series of carbon steels I've used in forgings. And then by the time you get up to the harder steels, you've gone from the B range, you're up to the C range. And for a 431 stainless steel, you're around HRC 33. And when you get up to a 17.4, you're up to about an HRC 35 or higher. And that, while it's equates to surface hardness or material hardness, it also gives you an insight into how easy that material is to bend. The softer the material, the easier it is to make an adjustment to the hosel.
Yeah. So that's the majority, I guess, of the cast, and I guess you'll talk a little bit about forge, right? Yeah.
And then the majority of forgings are going to be from a carbon steel, and carbon steels are identified either from a U.S. manufacturer like a 1020, 1022, 1025, 1030 to an Asian or more specifically Japanese manufacturer, an S20C, S25C, all of those, the numerical value in there that represents the carbon content. So a 1020 carbon steel has actually just a couple percent of carbon in there versus like a 1030, which has a percentage more. We're talking about small quantities, but still it makes a very big difference on the way that material is used once it's been fabricated. And another type of material that you'll find used a little bit more often these days in forgings is a stainless steel. And the forged stainless steels have a benefit in the fact that once you do forge it, you don't have to chrome plate it to keep it from rusting. Of the carbon steels, whether you forge them or you cast it like 8620, will rust on you. And the beauty of all the stainless steels, whether they are cast or forged, is the fact they don't need the protective coating from being, you have to protect them from oxidation.
Now, but there are also some forgings that aren't as easy to bend, too. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct. And quite often the stainless steel forgings will fall in that category.
Okay.
If you go back and you look at some collectible clubs from decades ago, there were some very difficult to bend stainless steel forgings that had been produced out there. And, you first think, why did you use such a hard material? And secondly, why did you produce a club head that just can't be manipulated? Any golf club head can be manipulated. And
depends on how bad you want to do it, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the purposes why I wrote the book, was to show club fitters and club makers that if you run across challenges where you need to bend a hosel and you don't think you can get there, usually you can, but it takes a little bit of work. And
sometimes you have to pull the head and actually heat it and things like that is what things you talked about.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes when you're dealing with the 17.4 iron head and you can't get any movement out of the hosel, you can heat treat it yourself in your oven at home. By taking that club and removing the shafts, and laying it on a tray and popping it in the oven for 2 to 3 hours at around 350 degrees or 400 and through there, you're going to basically end up speeding up all the molecules within the club head. And as you take that out after it's gone through the heat treatment, you allow it to air cool. All of those molecules, as they slow down, they align themselves equidistant from one another, which is different than how they cool after a molten pouring of the hot steel. And it's this realignment of the molecules that have them equidistant from one another in this new heat-treated state that enables you to go ahead and place the bend in the hosel and accept that bend. But that's, again, dealing with a 17.4. Quite often I'll have someone who needs to take some 431 irons and get them bent 10 degrees. And if they haven't gone through...
Well, that's interesting, right?
The special annealing treatments, that putting in the oven is not going to accomplish the same thing that the 17.4 was able to accomplish. So in those instances, again, you end up removing the shaft out of there. And I end up working with each club head while it's still in the bending machine, and essentially heat the hosel red hot with a propane torch. And once you have that entire hosel red hot, you can really go to town on the bend there. Yeah. 10 degrees is not a problem in any direction. What you need to be careful of is once that starts cooling, how will that cool? How will that bend fall out of context of where you bent it to cool? And you might find that you might have to go back and do a second adjustment, but it might only be a 1.5 or 2 degree adjustment to get to your final destination than that big long 10 degree adjustment that you had just made with the hosel red hot.
Yeah.
And in those cases, I recommend you have naturally all the appropriate protection on, but quite often take it out of the machine and quench it in water to get it cooled down quicker. And then you can go back and measure it and determine, okay, I still need to make a 1 or 2 degree adjustment to get to my final target. But from there on, you usually don't have to heat it again.
Yeah. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure I'm not ever going to do that, although it would be an interesting activity. But that really moves us into the next question, and that is, there are, in my view, quite a number, and I'm not going to say names of people, of companies, but club companies where the irons that they make are very, very difficult to bend. I mean, obviously they can do people can do the things you talked about. But why in our world when people want to make adjustments, I think, or may need adjustments, why do companies do that? And I'm not trying to point fingers or anything, but is it from a standpoint of the performance of material in terms of the COR or things like that, or enough about this stuff to give us a little insight into that?
It depends on, it's really design intent. And sometimes design intent and what a company will want to market over a club outweighs the flexibility to be able to customize it, when really the OEMs really care less about custom fitters taking product and customizing it for their clients. A company that comes up with a very hot face CT design utilizing high strength steels that allow the face to flex and trampoline at a faster speed or a faster recovery rate than a cast stainless steel. They're sacrificing something in a lot of areas, in sound, in feel, all for the sake of providing distance. And so that distance becomes the driving force in that iron design. But other factors that could be very important to golfers kind of get pushed by the wayside. Likewise, when you take a multi-material construction and you have different types of metal that have all been brought together, essentially taking a golf club and making a 3D puzzle piece out of it.
Yeah.
When you join these materials together, you often override whatever their individual material properties would be for each element. And as you bring them together as an aggregate, you end up with something that is not very versatile from a custom fitter standpoint to be able to work with. And so the companies don't go out of their way to ensure the club fitter can't adjust the equipment. What they're trying to do is they're trying to achieve a certain type of product that then makes them very marketable, unique, stand out from their competition. And that's what they're really
pushing.
Building the powers around to to market that as opposed to also say, well, we did that, but yeah, it's also very adjustable. And sometimes that just can't be the case.
So a very discerning question, or valuable question for a golfer to keep in the back of their mind is, I seem to be getting great distance and stuff. If I need to adjust these, though, is it possible? And that's, that's probably a hard question for somebody to be thinking about when they're going through a fitting, I would suspect. So,
well, the fitter's the one who is really
tries to know that things, yeah.
Yeah, they know which products they can make easy adjustments to and which ones they cannot. So if you have a very good inventory of product that you work with, that's why someone who sells and makes available product that they're very familiar with becomes an expert at that. And that might seem kind of a corny viewpoint, but I mean, it's so true. You know a product that's sold on the market intimately, more so than a club fitter across town, and you know the versatility that you have in fitting that to people. Because you're a good fitter and you know that product so well and what you're capable of doing with it, you're going to be able to put product in someone's hands that they're going to be very happy with.
Yeah.
And, it could be a product that other people don't understand and have badmouth, and it's their lack of understanding or not being, having worked with it and knowing the full capability of customization they can do with it that limits them and makes them badmouth it, when in reality, if you really understand and get to know the product that you're working with and the full degree that you can make that fit different types of golfers, you're just going to become an expert at not only fitting with that, but also selling it.
Yeah. Well, let's step back a little bit to one of the things that a lot of people know, but maybe not everybody, and that is when you're bending an iron. This is sort of like bending 101, but I think it's good to remember. Talk about what happens when you're modifying the loft of an iron and its effect on bounce and how that can be important. I mean, people often don't think about the fact that, all irons typically have some amount of bounce, not just wedges, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There are a couple of variables that come into effect when you go to adjust the loft on an iron. And while most people don't think of it, a good fitter is very cognizant of it. But as you said, Tony, most irons have bounce on them. And as you look at a set of irons, and let's do a traditional 8 loft set, 3 through pitching wedge, you'd have the greatest amount of bounce built into the pitching wedge, and it would progressively reduce as you work your way to the 3 iron, because the 3 iron is more of a sweeping type of impact as far as turf interaction goes, versus the pitching wedge is a very descending angle of attack, a steeper angle of attack with the higher loft. And the bounce and the soles are designed to accommodate whatever type of angle of attack you're looking at based on the loft of that club within the set. And categorically, you have your pickers who, you've seen them on the range, they'll dump a bucket of balls and they'll go through that entire bucket and you're like, where's their divot? Yeah. They have a really clean, consistent angle of attack, and they pick everything nice and cleanly, and they don't have much turf interaction with the soles of their clubs. Versus the individual that looks like should have had a permit to, move so much earth because they're doing course design out there with their divots. Those individuals are going to need a lot more bounce on the soles of their clubs, even their long irons, because they come down so steep. Quite often, someone so steep has a higher club head speed, and you're taking a lot of turf. So you need the resistance or that bounce incorporated into the sole, even in the longer irons, when you have that type of swing. But as we go to adjust equipment for those individuals, first of all, you want the starting point for the picker versus the divot taker or anybody in between. You want a good starting point as far as bounce goes within the set. And then as you go to make adjustments to loft, you're going to alter that bounce. For every degree that you strengthen or de-loft that iron, you're going to sacrifice 1 degree of bounce in the sole. And likewise, the reverse is true. If you're adding loft or weakening the club, for every degree that you weaken it, you add another degree of bounce. And quite often you're making a 1 or 2 degree loft adjustment. For a lot of people, that bounce interaction is somewhat trivial, but it is something that needs to be kept in check as you're going through, especially if you're dealing with someone at the extreme ends, the picker or the extreme divot taker, because you really want to maximize or minimize the bounce that you have going on. The second element that's also affected as you go to adjust loft is the offset.
And that's what most people don't think about that part at all.
They don't think about that at all. And if you have this offset is usually a design element that better players are really tuned into. And the reason they're more tuned into them than a weekend or occasional golfer is the fact they're good golfers. They pound a lot of balls to get as good as they are, and they're used to looking at the setup, that face behind the ball, before they strike every shot. And if you start adding offset to it because you've strengthened the club, visually that can start looking a little crazy to certain golfers, and those that really dislike offset are going to absolutely resist trying to impart more offset into their clubs. And again, as you weaken it, you end up removing offset. So the influence of the offset, while it is more visual to a lot of golfers than the bounce element, which most people can't even see from the setup position, that offset still is important. From a refined competition level golf swing. When I was working at Spalding Top Flight back in the 90s, Payne Stewart had been with Wilson's staff, and when his Wilson contract was up, he didn't renew, he jumped over to Spalding to play the Top Flight irons. And I had known Payne from my days working out in the tour van, having done a lot of equipment work. And when I came over to Spalding, the first thing they did was got me in the conference room and said, we got to do something with Payne Stewart because he's been with us over a year now. He hasn't won a tournament. And, you know, he's our marquee player.
Yeah.
And so I got on the horn with Payne and said, what's the problem with the irons? He goes, I can't align them. And I said, send me your old Wilsons. So he shipped me his old Wilson staff that he had won with many times, and I started looking at them, and he had face progression in there. And I knew which irons he was playing out of the Top Flight line, which had offset in there. And the alignment issue that he had was really that going from a little bit of face progression to just a tinge of offset. Most people said that the irons that he was playing with from the Top Flight line were a non-offset iron. There's just a little bit of offset on there, but he was used to face progression. And that little amount of where that leading edge is at between the Wilson set and the Spalding set, we're less than a quarter inch apart. But it really affected his alignment. And what he ended up doing was taking a set of the Top Flights, cutting the hosels off, re-welding them on to put just a little tinge of face progression on there. And the second tournament that he played in after we had done that, he won. So when people look at offset, quite often they're not looking at it from a performance standpoint. It's more of an appeal to the eye. But in reality, that definitely does have an impact on how a lot of golfers will set up to their shot.
Now, take 1 minute, too, for maybe for non-fitters and talk about what face progression is.
Well,
the quickie version.
when we're looking at offset for face progression, most irons on the market have offset in them. And so if you were to take the leading edge of your hosel and look at where the leading edge of the face is in relation to it, typically an offset will have the leading edge of the face slightly to the right or behind the leading edge of the hosel for a right-handed golfer. Zero offset will have the leading edge of the face on the same plane as the leading edge of the hosel. And then if we look at a set of irons that have face progression, the leading edge of the face projects in front of the leading edge of the hosel.
Yeah. Just to make sure everybody was on the same page. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you about my experience this weekend, but I'll tell you that after we're done and why I asked that. We're not going to talk too much about drivers and driver bending and things like that because I really want to get into putters, but just a little bit about drivers and driver bending, if you would. Which not many people do it, right? I know that for sure.
Not many people do it. First of all, the OEMs have come out with all of the adjustability. That really makes it very easy for not only the fitter, but the retailers as far as how much stock they have to inventory, because you can make a lot of adjustments to the same club. But when it comes to taking a non-adjustable hosel on a metal wood, first of all, you need to have the appropriate type of bending machine that it can lock into. Most people don't have that available to them. Once you overcome that step and you find a bending machine that can hold that, then depending on if it's a driver, which would more likely be titanium, versus a fairway or hybrid wood, which would more than likely be stainless steel, you have two different considerations that need to be made. In the case of a driver, let's say you're able to lock that thing down and you can put all the force you want on it. If it's a 6'4" investment cast body, it's going to be very difficult to bend. And you're only going to be able to get maybe a couple degrees out of there at most before you end up cracking the crown at the base of the hosel. That's typically where the failure will occur. And again, in the past, I've taken a propane or acetylene torch. I end up heating the base of that hosel, or the entire hosel, on a titanium wood to get the bend in there. And then you have to go out, send it out for refinishing for painting, because there's no way that a painted driver will end up looking pretty at all after you put the heat to it.
Yeah, that's
when it comes to the fairway and hybrid woods, more than likely you're dealing with a 17/4 casting. Again, you need to ensure that heat treatment's been in there, and you might be able to get 2 degrees out of those. But over the years, especially as fairway woods have grown in volume, I find that I end up putting dents in the crown or other parts of the head due to the force that it takes to adjust the hosel than I did when I work out on tour, because that, even though the head weights are the same, the volume of the heads have increased in size, which means the wall thicknesses are thinner. So bending metal woods, period, is a challenge. You really need to be an expert at it and someone who's willing to take a risk, and also have a customer, if you're doing it for a client, that's willing to take the risk with you, because every time I go to bend metal woods, I'll tell the individual I'm bending it for that, we might not have a one-piece head here when we're done.
Best to get the right specs before you do it, right?
If at all possible.
Yeah. Well, and that is really, I thought about this before we about 10 minutes or so before we started the interview, and it relates to putters, because I'm going to preface our discussion on this that I think it's more important than people realize to get the right loft and lie of their putter fit at the beginning, because of what can happen to the putter if you try to modify it, and particularly to modify it a lot. Would you agree with that?
I'll just give you 2 words. Scotty Cameron.
Oh, geez. Okay.
What you're talking about essentially put Scotty Cameron on the map. Now, granted, Scotty's a talented guy. He would have got on the map one way or the other. But Scotty got his first high-profile tour player and subsequently tour wins by approaching Bernard Langer with what was the most popular putter model out on tour at the time, back in the early 90s, which was a Ping Answer. And having been working out on the tour at that time, I knew the Ping tour reps really well. They'd come running into my trailer and borrow my equipment and adjust the loft, adjust the light, run back out there and take the product to the player. Scotty's been out there first with Ray Cook, and then on his own, and then a little bit under the Mizuno flag for a year, and then on his own again, and the Titleist. He was paying his dues and was really making some really beautiful art in the form of putters. And he got his first high-profile player by, instead of taking one putter out there and adjusting the loft to the golfer, he took 3 identical putters out there, all with slightly different lofts on them.
Yeah.
And unlike what the Ping rep had done with Bernard Langer, okay, we got that. Oh, let's adjust the loft a little and run back to the tour van and come back. There we go. We've got the right loft for you, but we've altered the bounce in the process. In Scotty's case, Bernard tried the 3 different putters, found the loft he liked, and the difference between the 3 different lofts of Scotty versus the Ping is that as that Ping putter was adjusted, the bounce angle of that putter was also affected. And as that bounce angle was increased or decreased, the face of the putter either rolled closed or rolled open as the adjustment was made. And because Scotty had taken the same design, put 3 different lofts on it, but kept the bounce consistent as it needed to be, if it hadn't been adjusted, Bernard was able to set the putters down, find the right roll, and it was a very easy transition for him to move out of the Ping and into the new Scotty Cameron.
Wow, what an interesting story. So let's dive into that, just for a couple minutes to the sort of the specifics. Let's take adjusting lie angle first, okay? Because, so what does adjusting lie angle do to what we typically call the face balance of a putter, right? And particularly if you do it a lot, and if you do it a little bit, maybe not much, but the basics.
There's 2 approaches to take in consideration when adjusting lie angle on putters. Is it face balanced or is it not? And if you take a face balanced putter and you adjust the lie angle, well, what made that putter face balanced to begin with? The center axis of the shaft projects down towards the very center of the face. And even though the shaft stops before the face and you have the hosel there, if you were to take the axis of that shaft and continue its projection, you'll see that it intersects the very center of the face right on the leading edge. Now, as you go to flatten it, that projection of that axis plane of the shaft now moves out closer towards the toe. And if you go more upright, it projects it more heelward. And so you end up intersecting the center of the face, and in turn, the putter, as it is either bent more upright or flatter, is going to end up, instead of perfectly face balanced, it's going to end up more toe up or more toe down. It'll still be close to a face balance, but you've lost the face balancing. And so if face balance is important to retain, adjusting lie angle is going to influence the factor of that. If you have a plumber's neck or like a heel located hosel like on an 8802 or something, moving the lie angle up or down is not going to have an influence on the toe hang like it does with a face balanced putter. So back in the day, I ran an experiment using a putting robot, and there's an adjustable putter made by Golf Mechanics that you can go roughly 10 degrees up, 10 degrees flat, and you can also adjust the loft quite a bit. And I had taken that adjustable fitting putter and put it on the putting robot, and starting at 5 feet away from the hole, ran a number of experiments where it kept going back another 5 feet to see the influence of lie angle on putts. And is able to go back to 25 feet away from the hole with a 10-degree up all the way down to a 10-degree flat, and the ball was still falling into the cup. And so from a performance standpoint, as far as proper lie angle fit, lie is really important more from a golfer's setup position than it is from the mechanics, unless the golfer changes their mechanics because of the way the putter looks to them based on lie. You know, when it comes to loft, but when it comes to that loft, that loft influences the bounce, which influences how that club will set up and roll open or stay straight. The loft is very important as far as taking into account what you've done to that putter, whereas lie angle is not quite as important unless you're really dealing with face balancing.
Now, and you can also do things if you're adjusting loft and play around a little bit with lead tape on the bottom to sort of negate what that effect of changing the bounce is to let the putter sit correctly, right?
There's always manipulation that the fitter can do. The challenge is, will the client accept that manipulation that you've created?
Yeah.
And some people will say, hey, I don't care about lead tape, just make this thing functional. Whereas to a lot of golfers, no, I want this looking as pristine as possible. Don't add anything to my head here.
Yeah, yeah. But it's still worthwhile knowing about it. So there you go.
Yes.
Well, Jeff, I think we covered pretty much. We didn't talk anything particularly about wedges, but I think what they fit in irons. Although you could go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the same application that we discussed on irons as far as the influence of bounce and offset apply to wedges. The only thing I like to point out with wedges is that if you have a good collection of lofts and bounces that you use to the starting point, you know that by bending a couple degrees either direction, you can come up with really any combination you think a customer of yours might need for bounce and loft. And so even though you're looking for a 51-degree bounce club, 51-degree loft club that has 12 degrees of bounce on it, you might not be able to find that for sale from a retailer or a company, but gosh, if I take this 48-degree wedge with 9 degrees of bounce and I weaken it 3 degrees, I've got 51 and 13, or 51 and 12. There's a lot of contortion or manipulation that you can really dial in on a wedge fitting if you just use your imagination.
Because of knowing how you're affecting the bounce and the loft together in the combination. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad we talked about that. Well, that was really great, a great overview of the things in your book and some of the things to pay attention to. So, any final words or final things you suggest golfers do related to the things we talked about today to help them play their best and to really understand their clubs? Well,
I'm going to have to kind of split that between golfers and club fitters, what they should know. Golfers should know they need a knowledgeable club fitter. I don't think a lot of while the information in the book is pertinent to anybody playing golf and their equipment, we really rely upon the club fitters to get the equipment right. And the book could be deemed as a self-help book for someone who doesn't know much and goes out and buys the bending equipment and follows the guidance in there. They could become quite good. But really, it all boils down to the fitter. How are they going to fit the individual, and how confident are they going to be able to then adjust the equipment so that it results in the fit that they like? There's one other element that I kind of want to focus on. And, what we're talking about here are making bends to the hosels of golf clubs. And anybody that wants to become a good club fitter and subsequently club builder needs to get a feel for all these different materials as they go to bend the hosels. And when I used to teach classes on bending equipment, the first exercise that I always do is get a club into a bending machine and have them break the hosel. You got to find out what that point of resistance is before the material gives up and says, okay, you won. I'm now a two-piece head. You got to start there. Go get some junk heads, bend them till they all break, and you might find some little discoveries in there. This club here I can't bend, or this club here I can't break, or this club here you can barely touch and you have two pieces. So, bend till you break is a good starting point on kind of getting your skill up on being able to good club bender. And once you have that feel, just like a feel in a golf swing, you've got that kind of ingrained, and when you get that resistance point, you can go no further.
That's a fabulous comment. And you do get the feel more and more as you work with things, but it's easy at the start to be afraid, right?
Correct.
and it's natural, but that great advice is to break things, not the customers' clubs, but things that you practice with. That's right. Well, Jeff,
that's what they have garage sales for in Goodwill.
That's right. Well, this has been terrific today. I'm going to put links in the show notes to your website and also to this book. I know it's on Amazon. It's also on your website too. I think people can purchase.
I recommend going through Amazon. I actually disabled the link for me to fulfill the book.
Is that right?
You can have Amazon do it.
I'll have this isn't totally relevant, but it came the next day.
Awesome.
I couldn't believe that. That doesn't typically happen with Amazon, but usually it's 2 days anyhow.
They have like 250,000 of those sitting in the warehouse, so I think they can get rid of them pretty quickly.
There you go. Well, thanks for taking the time with me and helping educate golfers and club fitters more today. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Tony. Thank you so much.
www.GameImprovementGolf.com.
Jeff, thanks. The Perfect Bend is, to me, one of those must-have reference books for true custom club fitters and club builders, but it's also a valuable and easy read for golfers who want to understand more about the basics of golf club bending and how it might affect their golf performance. So I've included links in the show notes to finding more about Jeff Sheets at Jeff Sheets Golf Design and to where you can purchase The Perfect Bend on Amazon.com. Well, as I said 110 times in the past, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, I'll bring back a good friend, Russ Ryden from Fit to Score Golf, who has also created the great website, Golf Shaft Reviews. He'll provide some up-to-date information on things we need to know about golf shafts and golf shaft performance to help golfers to shoot lower scores. See you in 2 weeks.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.GameImprovementGolf.com